All right, hi. I hope everyone's doing well. So at this point, you should have looked at the agenda for today, and that includes taking a look at the slides for effective document design. As I mentioned in the agenda, some of the information is not going to be entirely relevant to what you're doing here, but a lot of the points are going to apply to the document design of the observational logbook, the research report, and later the poster, right? So it's important that you have some understanding, some sense of what effective document design looks like in order to produce professional looking documents that also follow the conventions of what each type of document is asking for, right? Because your readers are going to be expecting your documents to follow those certain looks. So what I want to do now is take a look at the sample observational logbook that we posted on Canvas. So I'm navigating to it now. So we're in Files. Then we're going to make our way to Sample Papers. And so here's the sample observational logbook. I'm going to go ahead and download it. All right, so here we go. So the one thing to keep in mind here is that the content of this sample paper itself is not that important. What's most important are the formatting guidelines. So remember that your papers need to be in APA format, right? APA 7. So as we've discussed in the past, or as I pointed out, there are new guidelines for student papers, so they look slightly different than professional papers. But there are some general things that to be mindful of, right, for both the logbook and the research report. So first thing is making sure that you include page numbers on the top right-hand corner of the page, beginning with the title page, right? So speaking of the title page, let's take a look at it now. Then you're going to have your title in bold, you're going to leave some space, and you're going to have your name, the title of the department, or in this case, the program of the class that you're writing the paper for, the name of the class itself, the name of your instructor, and then the date, right? Going into the beginning of the actual paper itself, you have the title in bold again, right? And then you launch into what you're doing. And just a reminder, you are continuing to include pagination on the top right hand side. I know a lot of you already know these things, but just it's always useful to review them, right? So the introduction of the logbook is essentially going to be a revised or cleaned up version of what you already had in the research proposal, right? So the easiest way to think about it in this case is to go back and look at the methods section for the proposal, go and make any necessary revisions so that you clearly establish what you were setting out to do for the logbook, right? So you see that reflected in the language here. The purpose of the study is to determine the effective salt concentration on the rusting process of iron, right? I'm not going to go into that much detail here, but you can go ahead and look at this example logbook on your own time. Keep going. So essentially the writer here is outlining everything that they did or planning to do for the logbook, right? And then let's take a look at the daily entries, right? So what you have here are clearly labeled entries for each day. This is following the directions in the assignment sheet, right? So you should be doing the same thing in your own logbook. So specify what day of observation it is that you're talking about, give the date, give the time, right? And then you launch into your two sections. So you have your description, and then you're going to have your speculation, right? The speculation is basically where you start to analyze what you saw on that particular day, and this is where you can also raise follow-up questions, right? Something that we haven't really talked about and that I want to take a look at now is the formatting for the images, because remember, for each day you want to provide evidence of your observations, so your reader is not just going to believe whatever you said happened that day. You need to provide photographs, you need to provide graphs, charts, whatever the case may be, to provide evidence for your observations. And so in this case, it's fairly simple, right? So APA says that you need to clearly label each type of graphic. So if it's a table, table 1, table 2, so on and so forth. Same thing if it were a graph, right? The title itself is going to be in bold, as you see here. Right underneath that, you have a brief descriptive caption that tells your reader what they're looking at. This needs to be italicized, just as you see here, right? Then you have your graphic. These are basically the students' observations for that day, or pointing out the observations for that day. The other thing to keep in mind here, this is going to be important, right, when you're considering effective document design, that you want to guide your reader, right? You don't just plop your images or your graphs in your paper. You need to show your reader what they're looking at, right? You need to guide your reader to show them what you're talking about. So you use directive language. So as it says here, right, the student writes as shown in table 1, and then table 1 is below, right? So you need to be doing the same thing. You need to be referring to your images in your paper, and then your reader can go ahead and refer to them as they're making their way through your logbook, through your report. All right, keep going. So now we have the first figure. So very simple, clear label, figure 1, brief description that tells the reader what they're looking at. So in this case, it's the steel wool and different solutions during the day 1 observation. Then the images themselves. All right. A quick note on the images. Most of you know this already, but again, just for clarification or emphasis, you want to make sure that the images that you produce are of a good quality, they have a good resolution, right? They shouldn't be so small that we can't tell what's going on in these images, but they also shouldn't be too big that they're going to take up a lot of space in your paper. These are, the images in this example are kind of on the larger side, but they're fine because it lets us appreciate and see everything that the writer is talking about, so it's fine in this case, but just be mindful of that, right? And then as you keep scrolling, right, same thing for each day. So this is the second day. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but essentially the writer is doing the same thing. There's a description for that day, speculation, the tables that record the data for that day, the figures, so on and so forth, right? So I'm going to scroll to the end now, just to show you what the end of this logbook looks. So remember, you have your 5 days worth of observation, and at the end, once you have your 5 days worth of observation and data, you're going to write a brief narrative. Right? So here is that narrative. So you have the heading here, narrative, and then that narrative is going to have its own description and speculation section. And remember that in this case, the description and speculation is of the 5 days total, right? And so here you give an account of what happened on those 5 days, right? You don't have to go into the same amount of detail as you did in your daily observations because the idea is that you've already shared those, but basically touch on the main points, the most important points, right? And as you see, the writer here does a good job of referring to the images, right? And then what's really good about this example is that figure 6 is essentially a graph that charts the percent increase in weight of the steel wool from the first day to the end of the 5-day observation, right? This image is clearly labeled. This is also a very important part of effective document design, right? That you want to make sure that everything is clearly labeled so that your reader knows what they're looking at, understands what they're looking at. The days are here, right? The percentages, they're color coded so we can easily distinguish, right? And then the second part of that narrative is the speculation, right? So this is where you engage with your hypothesis again. So in this case, the writer goes back and reassesses what they thought was going to happen in light of what actually happened, right? The writer also provides some explanation for why the results of the 5-day observation didn't entirely match what they thought was going to happen. So this is something that you should be doing as well. Right? And then the other important thing, as mentioned on the assignment sheet, is that at the end of your speculation section, you want to provide your reader with a sense of what you've learned, right? So very clear, very simple here. The writer states, if I were to do this experiment again, I would have more trials, blah, 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 right? So you should be doing the similar thing, right? Think about what worked, what didn't work in your observation. And here is the chance to be honest. We want you to be honest, right? So if something affected your experiment, your observation, this is the place to talk about it, right? So you might say, my data might not be entirely valid because I moved some things around, or I wasn't consistent in the time I made my observations, whatever the case may be, right? Above all, the goal is to be clear and honest, right? So don't hide things, especially things that might make you look bad. I'm using air quotes here. Obviously, you can't see me doing that, right? But the goal is to be honest here and faithfully account for everything that happened, right? And rather than beating yourself up or whatever, here you have a chance to rethink a potential redesign, relaunching of your experiment or observation, right? So that's the end of the logbook, right? And this is the end of this brief overview. If you have any questions, please let us know. And once again, you know where this example is available on Canvas, so go ahead and look at it in your own time. Right? Thank you very much. Hope you're doing well. Take care.